Minutes after vowing a crushing response to US strikes on Iranian territory, Tehran launched what it described as a massive retaliation campaign, sending a clear message that it would not absorb the attacks without striking back. Following US military operations targeting more than 80 locations across Iran, Iranian forces responded with a barrage of counterattacks, claiming to have hit back with a similar scale of strikes. The rapid exchange marked a dramatic escalation, transforming a dangerous standoff into a direct cycle of attack and retaliation. In a statement carried by state broadcaster IRIB, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that its Navy and Aerospace Force jointly carried out a missile and drone operation targeting what it said were 85 key U.S. military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait. The IRGC also claimed that Iranian forces shot down a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone during the operation. The strikes, according to Tehran, were retaliation for the latest U.S. military attacks on Iranian territory following the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. These are Iranian claims, and the scale of any damage has not been independently confirmed. But what happened next in Bahrain was very real. Soon after Iran's announcement, Bahrain activated nationwide emergency sirens. The country's interior ministry urged citizens and residents to move immediately to the nearest safe locations while authorities assessed the threat. Bahrain hosts the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, making it one of America's most strategically important military hubs in the Gulf. For a small island kingdom, the sound of sirens from coast to coast was a stark reminder of what it means to host American power in the middle of an American war. Iran also claimed its missiles and drones struck American military installations in Kuwait. Kuwait hosts several major U.S. facilities, including Ali Al Salem Air Base, Camp Arifjan, and other logistics hubs that support American operations across the Middle East, sites that have been repeatedly targeted by Iranian forces since the start of hostilities in the region. While Iranian state media described the strikes as successful, there has been no independent confirmation of the extent of any damage. That gap between what Tehran claims and what can be verified has become a defining feature of this war. The retaliation followed a major U.S. military operation against Iran earlier in the day. According to U.S. Central Command, American forces struck Iranian air defense systems, coastal surveillance radars, anti-ship cruise missile batteries, surface-to-air missile sites, and drone launch positions. Washington said the operation came in response to attacks on 3 commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz, attacks it blamed on Iran and described as wholly unacceptable. A violation of the ceasefire that endangered civilian shipping through one of the world's most vital maritime choke points. Iran tells the story in reverse. In Tehran's view, it was Washington that crossed the red line first. Iran's foreign ministry blasted the U.S. decision to revoke a temporary sanctions waiver on limited oil exports, branding it a direct violation of the memorandum that served as the cornerstone of the ceasefire and the fragile diplomatic process. In a strongly worded statement, Tehran said Washington would bear full responsibility for the consequences of breaching the agreement, and warned that Iran reserves the right to take any action it deems necessary to protect its national interests and security. And that sanctions decision is where this latest spiral truly began. The US Treasury revoked a general license that had temporarily allowed the sale of Iranian crude oil and petroleum products. The waiver, originally issued in June, had been expected to remain in effect until August 21st. Instead, Washington shortened the deadline, ordering all remaining transactions to end by July 17th. American officials said the move was a direct response to the attacks on commercial shipping near the Strait of Hormuz. For Tehran, it was the moment the economic lifeline of the deal was cut. Soon after the sanctions announcement, reports emerged of multiple explosions across southern Iran. Iranian media reported blasts in Bandar Abbas, Sirik, and Keshem Island, areas overlooking the strait and home to key naval and military infrastructure. A U.S. official told Reuters the strikes targeted Iranian air defense systems, coastal surveillance assets, anti-ship cruise missiles, surface-to-air missile positions, and drone launch sites. The diplomatic crisis had become a military one. In a matter of hours. The escalation has now fueled the question that hangs over every energy market on the planet. Could Iran respond by restricting traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 1/5 of global oil supplies pass? Some regional media outlets have reported unconfirmed claims that elements of the IRGC Navy received preliminary instructions related to maritime traffic in the strait. It must be stressed that there has been no official confirmation from Iranian authorities that any closure has been ordered, and such reports have circulated before without materializing. But the mere possibility is enough to rattle shipping companies, insurers, and oil traders worldwide. War risk premiums in the Gulf were already elevated after months of attacks on shipping, and every new headline about the strait pushes them higher. Some vessels have reportedly begun delaying transits or waiting outside the Gulf for clarity, the same early warning signs seen in previous rounds of this crisis, when insurance costs alone were enough to reroute global trade. Any attempt to block the strait would likely trigger another major international crisis, with immediate consequences for global energy prices, and it would put Iran in direct confrontation, not just with Washington, but with every economy that depends on Gulf oil, including partners Tehran cannot afford to alienate. Step back, and the bigger picture is grim. The memorandum that was meant to be a pathway to peace has unraveled in a matter of weeks. What began as a framework to reduce tensions, with sanctions relief on one side and restraint on the other, has collapsed into a cycle of accusation and retaliation, with each side insisting the other violated the deal first. Washington points to the attacks on commercial vessels. Tehran points to the revoked oil waiver and the strikes on its territory. And in that dispute lies the real danger, because when both sides believe they are responding rather than escalating, neither feels responsible for stopping. The United States and Iran have plunged back into confrontation, shattering the fragile stability of the Gulf, and the diplomatic channels that produced the ceasefire now face their hardest test, rebuilding trust between two governments that are actively firing at each other. The memorandum has not been formally torn up by either side, and that detail matters. Both capitals are still, on paper, committed to a framework they accuse each other of violating, which means a path back to the table technically exists. But every new strike makes that path narrower, and every casualty makes compromise politically costlier in Washington and in Tehran alike. For now, the region braces for whatever comes next. With Tehran claiming strikes on dozens of American facilities, Washington hitting targets along Iran's southern coast, and sirens sounding across Bahrain, the risk of a broader regional conflict is rising by the hour. The coming days will reveal whether this exchange becomes another peak in a cycle both sides eventually walk back from, as they have before, or the point where the ceasefire dies for good. Much will depend on what independent verification reveals about the real damage on both sides, whether the Hormuz reports harden into anything official, and whether any mediator, from Oman to Qatar to Moscow, can pull the two back to the table. There are also the players watching from just off stage. Gulf states that host American forces, from Bahrain to Kuwait to Qatar, now find their own territory in the line of fire for a conflict they did not choose, and their patience with both Washington and Tehran is wearing thin. China and Russia, whose economies and strategies are tied to Gulf stability, are pressing for de-escalation. Even Israel, watching Iran's missile inventory in action, is recalculating. The Gulf has been here before, on the edge, waiting. The question is whether this time someone steps over. Subscribe to WLA for daily geopolitical analysis.